Welcome to BIOS Builders. We are thrilled today to welcome Diego Rey, co-founder and CSO of Endpoint Health, to the show. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's good to be here.
So amazing to have you on, Diego. Let's kick things off. Can you share a brief personal intro on yourself?
Sure, yeah. Bit of background. Well, current role, Chief Scientific Officer at Endpoint Health, on the board, co-founder, along with two other co-founders, Jason and Leo. And the background. So prior to Endpoint, started another company called GeneWEAVE Biosciences. That was actually with the same founders, Jason and Leo. That was a company that spun out of Cornell University. I was a grad student at the time. Went through the classic Series C to A, B rounds of financing. We built out our product. That was a diagnostics company. We were detecting and identifying bacteria and guiding antibiotic therapy in hospitalized patients. And we ended up getting to the point where we built our product. We're going through our clinical studies, and we got acquired by Roche relatively early in the process. Actually, prior to getting through our product through the FDA, that happened post-acquisition, and we did get it approved and out there. So joined Roche after the acquisition, had the same role at GeneWEAVE, Chief Scientific Officer there, co-founder, became head of research for our division at Roche. Stuck around for 2.5 years at Roche. And then between Roche and Endpoint, got recruited into Y Combinator as their first life sciences visiting partner. So YC already had 140 life sciences companies by the time I joined, which is phenomenal. I had no idea actually prior to going in there. That was great to see. And that was the first visiting partner with a life science background to come in and help there. That was really great. They got to see a lot of things, tools, diagnostics, therapeutics, devices, and anything that was bio-enabled, even SynBio companies, et cetera, kind of fell under what I was trying to help with there. And did that for a couple of years, and then ended up deciding time to start another company. Got the band back together with Jason and Leo, and we took the company through YC after that, and then we'll tell you more about Endpoint, I guess, as we're chatting here.
Yeah, that's a fantastic introduction from GeneWEAVE to YC, Roche. Again, thanks for the introduction, Diego. And while you're on the subject, could you provide a brief personal intro on Endpoint itself?
Yeah. So Endpoint is a precision immunology company. So we develop therapies, but with a precision approach. It's something that we like to call precision first biopharma. And what we mean by that is that very much on purpose, we started a therapeutics company with no molecules. And the rationale here was, let's start with patient data. We had an underlying hypothesis throughout, which is that in a lot of immune-mediated diseases, there are no approved therapies, like areas like sepsis and acute respiratory distress syndrome, critical care indications, what ended up killing most of COVID patients, unfortunately. Or the efficacy rates that you see, how well these therapies do when there are therapies approved in the autoimmune space, like in rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, et cetera, they're somewhat limited. And it's because not every patient responds. And we think it's because, well, not everyone's the same. And so we need to first understand that better, that biological heterogeneity that we think is driving these limitations. And not only gain those insights, but then also develop the diagnostic tools to be able to stratify the patients based on those insights. And then once we built all that, that's when we started bringing in our therapies and building our pipeline. And so the idea is to develop therapies that will end up likely with more than one therapy for a given disease area, because we're essentially redefining these diseases into type A and type B, for example, and each has a different therapeutic need. And so we should be developing multiple therapies potentially to really achieve higher levels of efficacy overall in a given disease area.
Of course, Diego, and I'm really excited to dive into this model with yourself today and talk about mostly the origin story, how you all have scaled up over the past few years. And I think your perspective, both as a repeat founding team, but also the amazing just groups you've had through, large scale experience through Roche and biopharma, through that acquisition, but also through YC, just seeing the landscape itself and then diving in back into the startup ecosystem with Endpoint. I think you and the team have just a lot of fantastic perspectives. I'm hoping we can learn today and dive into. But really, just to start from the basics, I would love to take this back to the origin story and really, like you said, this transition from Roche and into YC. In 2018, you helped bring the band back together, co-found Endpoint Health, really on that mission to address urgent needs in immune-driven, critical, and chronic diseases by delivering therapies that are just personalized to each patient's biology. Just taking a step back, Diego, can you tell us more about the genesis of Endpoint Health? What was really that spark that started it all?
Yeah, I think that what we were seeing was that there's all these phenomenal enabling technologies and tools that are being developed and becoming more useful out there. Anything from machine learning becoming really more actionable and mature to new modalities of therapeutic options progressing through the clinic, et cetera. And one of the key things that we were seeing is that if you look at the average age of big pharma, which has done a lot of good in the world. Obviously, of course, you have a phenomenal progress in medicine that's been achieved over the many years, but the average age of these companies is literally 150 years. And so, and when these companies were started, a lot of these enabling technologies weren't around from the get-go. They were bolted on, and many of these companies have done a good job at evolving with the times, essentially, and bringing in some of these new technologies. But we saw a need to maybe rethink how we were going to develop new therapies in these disease areas by starting a new pharma company from scratch with all of these enabling tools and techniques incorporated from the get-go. And so the idea was that we would integrate from the very beginning data, diagnostics, and therapeutics as just one thing. The product wasn't going to be any one of those things. The product was going to be maybe the combination of those. And really the product, the motivation here was that the product should be improved outcomes in these patients. And so that was kind of the motivating idea of it's about time to start a new pharma company. And we were seeing somewhat of a need to really have all of this integrated and not bolted on after the fact. In doing so, we might really look at diseases in a different way, develop therapies in a different way, and that's what we're working on.
100%, Diego. I think this holistic approach is something that is really necessary. It's novel in the space right now. And I think as we're kind of talking about the origin story, the creation of bringing this band together to start this up, you yourself have had such a journey through the startup experience, kind of seeing the San Francisco ecosystem scale up in kind of this next generation of startups. I'm just curious from your perspective as a repeat founder, but also working with a founding team that you've had in the past, seasoned folks that have gone in the trenches with you. You all have had an exit together. Do you have thoughts on working with kind of repeat teams, the idea of kind of bringing that group together for a new company?
Yeah, and so I consider myself super lucky to be in that situation. It's been now I did the math just the other day. It's 16 years working with Jason and Leo. So as you can imagine, we just really understand each other really well. A lot of respect, of course. So we're still working together. That means that we're still getting along. And so one of the things, I guess, practically speaking, it's made the way we do things very efficient. Because we could be completely open, transparent with each other. It's like inherent positive intent. It's so we could have very frank conversations, just get to the point, and really also kind of divide and conquer. That if I'm not tackling something, I know one of them is, and vice versa. And so that's been really great. Having co-founders. There's phenomenal companies built with solo founders, and I'm always extremely impressed with what they do, because it feels like it's almost easier with co-founders since you can spread the weight. and but been really lucky to be able to do so again with the same team. I think the other thing that's kind of a big difference second time around is that it's just as hard because we the idea that we had, the type of company we wanted to build was just 10x 100x the kind of the ambition of what we had in the last one, based on everything we've learned. And so then that means we keep things as hard, if not harder, than they were the first time. But at the same time, psychologically, it's very different. And part of that, I think, has to do with, first time around, just being worried about everything all the time because you were not sure what's important, what's not, and you learn along the way what to focus on. Second time around, you kind of already know, okay, what are the key areas that really we should be paying attention to, spending time on, and so it actually makes it a little bit more manageable, I think, in that regard. At least psychologically, you don't freak out about certain things that you shouldn't be freaking out about that in the end didn't matter as much. So that's been a big change.
Right, right. And I think we discuss in startups in the ecosystem, right? Team is everything, especially on these early formations. So it's amazing to see that you've had this support, you've had this group for so many years, and just the collaboration on that side is just wonderful. But another thing on your origin story, I just wanted to point out, Diego, that I thought was fantastic. Maybe just to get your insights, your thoughts as someone that joined kind of those early throes of the YC biospace and got to see a little bit of that evolution. I think as an advisor, as someone that was on the earlier ground floor and then spun out to bring their own company through batches and run that idea. I just would kind of have a simple question as a mentor, as an advisor, as someone that saw so many of these companies go through the early batches at YC. How did that shape your mindset, or just shape kind of the second time founding story as you were going through the YC batch yourself?
Yeah, so I guess leading up to that, becoming a visiting partner there, was a real privilege. It is exactly what I was kind of wanted after focusing on one thing for such a long time. Because the GeneWEAVE was straight out of grad school. That's all we were focused on, the one thing, building that company. And so I really wanted to kind of see what else is out there, just to kind of expand on. There at GeneWEAVE, we were focusing specifically on building a diagnostic that was providing insights and benefit to hospitalized patients. And so, well, what happens outside of the hospital? What did therapeutics companies need to work and deal with when you're building a company there? We were a physical diagnostic, but that's different than medical devices. So learned a lot about medical devices as well. And so that was a huge help to kind of expand beyond focusing on just one thing. It felt like I was actually kind of pulling my head out of the water for the first time after founding the GeneWEAVE and kind of seeing kind of everything else that was around. And so it was a really phenomenal experience. They really helped hone in on defining then what we should be focusing on in our next company. That was a real privilege for sure.
I think that was amazing. I think the head of the water ideas is just a great addition there, right? Just being able to see the space thematically. I bet that influenced a lot of the early stages of Endpoint, but I would love to dive in and just chat more about your phenomenal progress since then and your growth. And really just before we chat about Endpoint's approach, combining this, data science, companion diagnostics, and therapeutics, just putting this all together, just as a context, as we're talking about the space thematically, Diego, could you provide context for our audience and share more about the difficulties developing efficacious precision therapies? I think we talked about the space thematically, looking at medical devices, what happens when these therapies reach the clinic. But from your own perspective, what are some of the key unmet needs in the space currently that you saw while you were forming Endpoint?
Yeah, so it comes back to that key premise of really heterogeneity in these diseases, that they're kind of really almost redefining the diseases, right? We're saying basically that if you look at rheumatoid arthritis or ulcerative colitis or even sepsis, that and especially in a place like sepsis, that it's not really a treatable disease. That's less so the case in the autoimmune space. There's been very successful therapies there that have done a lot of really good, to a lot of patients. But if you look in the critical care space, it's this syndrome, observation of all these symptoms, and you really need to dig a little deeper to understand, well, what is driving the contribution to all those symptoms, and might there be actually different groups of patients, and once you get down to that level, that's the treatable disease, right, or the treatable trait. And so I think that's one of the key unmet needs, is that I think the current medicine has gotten us to where we are now, which is in a phenomenal place compared to where we were in the past, obviously. But the next set of innovation and progress, I think, will really benefit from kind of this more granular understanding at the biological level of these diseases, and we might end up effectively redefining them and saying that that it's actually there's multiple contributions to what we currently call a specific disease is actually really comprised of different things, and we should be treating each of those differently. I think there's a big unmet need there, but in order to do so, in order to effectively address that, there are complexities like you alluded to earlier. For us, that first step is gaining those insights, but those insights, I think, are not enough. That tells you, hey, there's more than one thing going on in this disease. But then, okay, well, how do you make that actionable? And that's where the diagnostic piece comes in, for example. And so that's a tool to be able to identify those patients in order to then develop and get the right therapy to that patient once you've gotten that therapy developed. So I think those are some of the key unmet needs and some of the challenges, kind of like I was mentioning before, the motivation for wanting to build a company.
Well, certainly. I think it dives into the perfect next question as we're discussing Endpoint, really bring in a lot of these challenges to develop personalized medicines. I mean, viable at large scale for patients. Your platform that you've been able to develop and commercialize, just both targeted therapeutics and companion diagnostics that are offering patients that potential to receive a therapy personalized to their biology and clinical needs, has been fantastic. So I want to break this down in a few ways, Diego. But just as a starting overview, can you tell us now just a bit more about Endpoint Solution, how it addresses some of these challenges? How did you and the team really arrive at that Endpoint Solution?
Yeah. So the way we go about addressing this is that one of the fundamental techniques that we employ is a non-hypothesis driven first step that includes things like unsupervised clustering, or the common technique, but we've developed a proprietary method around this, and specifically from whole blood gene expression data. I'll come back to why in a moment. But this first step is unsupervised, or really non-hypothesis driven, in the sense that we only look at that gene expression data in and of itself. We don't include any other information in this first step, really just starting to scratch the surface. No treatment or outcome information, no biological or clinical information about the patients where this blood is coming from. And we look for patterns in that data to see, are there groups of patients that look similar to each other just based on that data in and of itself. Spend a lot of time there making sure that actually when we see clusters that are different from each other, that they're reproducible across different cohorts and so on. And then only then do we now ask the question, well, what are the biological characteristics of these clusters? What are these things? Do they make sense? Do they give us insights into maybe addressing this biological heterogeneity, that there are more than one group, each more homogeneous in terms of their biology? And if so, well, then is that giving us ideas about what therapies do each of those need? What's the pathobiology of one versus the other? And do they each need different therapies to address that pathobiology? So in that second step, we then go much deeper than the whole blood gene expression data. We look at the cell level, we look at the tissue level, multi-omics analyses, et cetera, really understanding the biological characteristics of those groups much more deeply, and the clinical phenotypes associated with that. And going through that exercise now informs, well, what sort of pipeline of therapy should we build in order to address that underlying biology? And typically, if there's more than one group, it's more than one therapy, because they're each needing very different things. And then kind of coming back to the whole blood, even though we go much deeper than that in that second step, we always come back to that bulk blood specimen, undifferentiated by cell type. It's just bulk RNA data. And the reason is that those insights, again, we don't think are enough. We need to actually make those actionable. And so this is where the in vitro diagnostic or even a lab developed test where appropriate might make sense. And that whole blood specimen is just much more translatable into that diagnostic format, as opposed to differentiating by cell type, which will require a lot of sample prep, or working from the tissue level, which is difficult to actually obtain reproducible tissue samples. They introduce a lot of variability in a diagnostic setting. So we come full circle back to that whole blood specimen to then make this actionable, identify and stratify these patients based on their biology. And then we use that tool together with the insights of the biological characteristics of the subgroups to then go and develop the therapies, but always with the diagnostic co-developed with the therapy. Because we might find along the clinical development path that indeed we're seeing a differential treatment effect between one group and the other, and we should really be targeting the therapy to one group and targeting another therapy to the other. So both of those, the molecule and then the diagnostic, are then developed in parallel together.
And that's, again, amazing to see the amount of times you're reintegrating data, keeping it separated, and really starting from the basics to see how you can inform just the patient from every single level, starting just with whole blood gene expression data. I think we talk about this kind of modern era in life sciences. Data is really everything, and building out proper data sets. And as a company, you certainly have been able to develop and process this in parallel with the therapeutics and diagnostics that you're building out. I'd be really curious as well, just from a team perspective, as we're discussing all of these moving parts in forward, how are you and the team really thinking about building and expressing these interdisciplinary teams as you're scaling up Endpoint itself? So there's certainly a lot of missing pieces in the healthcare space right now on the modern front. But as you're developing these core principles of Endpoint and have actually integrated them at this point, how do you and the team think about building out these development groups?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point because one of the things that we got a lot of questions about when we were starting the company or really contemplating the type of company we wanted to build was, that's complex, that's complicated, right? It's you should be a diagnostics company, you should be a therapeutics company. You're going to try to do both, and that's a recipe for failure. And so I think that it is definitely something you need to be very thoughtful about. And balance focusing with covering all this ground at the same time. And so you need to be super thoughtful about how you build a team, to your point. So the team we built is one of the things I'm most proud of, really. All of us are, I think, at the company. We have the three co-founders with our experience, but then obviously we need to supplement that with a lot of experience that we don't have. And so we've brought in-house the right clinical development expertise, all the way from the early translational science preclinical stages to later stage clinical development. Everything that goes into developing a molecule, in addition to the clinical development component as well. Then also the diagnostics front. So we benefited from former colleagues that we've overlapped with, folks that have built companion diagnostics that are currently guiding therapies out there in the market from their time at Roche. Also folks that have spent some time at Garden Health, for example. A lot of great companies where the folks were able to really gain a lot of this key experience. And so we have all that all under one roof. At the same time, we keep it extremely lean. So one of the ways we make this manageable is that we try not to reinvent the wheel wherever we don't have to, right? GeneWEAVE was actually the opposite. GeneWEAVE was everything we built was custom and from scratch. New biologic reagent, new hardware, new wetware, everything was in-house. Most of the company was research and development and then later manufacturing facilities. At Endpoint, we have no wet labs. So we work with partners for diagnostic systems that are already established. We work with CROs, of course, on the clinical development front, et cetera. And so it's a complicated set of things that we do, we have the right key individuals, but we keep the team very lean, and we leverage a lot of partnerships in order to really make this more manageable.
Of course, and this partnership model is something I was excited to dive into as well. But I mean, proud of the team. You certainly should be as well. The endpoint team that you all develop has been truly fascinating, and it really applies to this question of scale I wanted to chat about when we're entering the clinic. Because really what I've seen from you all just from the beginning, Endpoint has really taken into account that challenge of scaling from the early stage startup to clinical biomanufacturing. As you've been building out this precision medicine platform, I mean, it's really indicative that through your team, the design of Endpoint's underlying platform itself, seeking to work within the clinic to mitigate this, as your branding says, like one molecule fits all challenge, right? This approach that you all have discussed is just amazing. So narrowing the focus a bit further, a little bit towards the clinic, I would just love to chat about within your pipeline initially targeting within the immunology space. What about the unique challenges that you are seeing right now that are in precision immunology, that are facing in therapies in manufacturing today?
Yes, actually, so this comes back to the previous topic. One of the ways we've managed this is actually we've avoided the problem, so to speak. So this is a great example where we really got to pick and choose our battles. And so the strategy we've had so far is that we either in-license or acquire therapies where the manufacturing has already been taken care of for the specific question. So 2 examples, we've in-licensed antithrombin 3 from a company called Grifols. This is a fractionated blood product. If you wanted to manufacture this yourself, it's next to impossible. It requires, it's derived from human blood, right? And so it requires a business that actually processes enough blood as their line of business with the, as you can imagine, incredibly complicated and expensive manufacturing facilities. So this is an example where Grifols supplies the drug, we're developing it, and so that's otherwise the company would have been only around building the capability to actually just make the molecule, right? Another example is we acquired a company last year called Iconic Therapeutics. This added a couple of drugs to our pipeline, monoclonal antibodies actually. But in terms of looking for molecules to bring in, whether in license or acquisition, we look for molecules that have progressed enough in their development. In this case, the CMC was complete to enable bringing the molecule into the clinic. So I actually don't have a really great answer to your question because we've avoided the challenges. But that's just kind of an example of the previous question about how to make this manageable.
No, of course. I think that's exactly what I wanted to target as well. I mean, your work with Grifols, the acquisitions as well, being able to sidestep it with partnerships. I was entirely fascinated on how you all added that. So I think it was a perfect explanation, Diego. I really loved that add there. But, as we talk about entrance into the clinic now, I think there's also as many challenges we're talking about in this partnership model within creating efficacious cell therapies and developing up on the side in the biomanufacturing stack. Integration into the clinic and standard of care is also something that's a massive undertaking as well. So I would love to just chat as well a little bit about the challenges integrating into the current standard care treatment, how you and the team are thinking of it, and also just as guiding principles, as folks that have thought about the design and the end product of your developing at Endpoint. I'm really curious how you all have thought about integration into the standard of care and just into the clinic in general.
Yeah, I think it's a hugely important topic because back to the actionable piece, right? It's like you got great insights, potentially a great therapeutic hypothesis, and then how do you actually get this to patients in a way that makes sense for the patients, but also the providers and the payers. And so I think that the key there is just having a really good understanding of those practicalities. That's where we benefit from a lot of our time over the last 16 years working in spaces where you need to deliver either actionable insights to guide therapy or therapies themselves. Really lucky to have that past experience there. I think some specific examples kind of simple things that, well, with that knowledge, there's kind of a very straightforward ways of actually addressing these things. Like if you're going to need to collect a specimen in order to generate your diagnostic result, in order to guide the therapy, for example, or provide a insight on how to treat the patient, use a tube that's off the shelf, as opposed to a custom built tube, if you can get away with it, right? That goes a long way. Understanding where's the sample being collected, where is that information going afterwards, just having a really deep understanding of those practicalities is really just the most important piece. To how you then go and tackle those depends on those nuances, but it's really kind of digging into those details. Just having the technical the solution being the diagnostic tool and the molecule, and the data backing that it's actually going to do some benefit, kind of gets you the entry ticket. And then but then to get through the door, you got to actually then go through all these practical aspects and make sure that it is actually being implemented. But I guess the important maybe punchline here, though, is that it can't be an afterthought as well. This needs to go into the very beginning of the design of the entire thing, as opposed to once you're ready to deploy the tool.
Well, certainly, and that was a bit of a tangent to my next question as well, Diego, that I was really curious about asking you all from a system standpoint as we're discussing the clinic. Just as a repeat founder, as you and the team have been working on this for so long, both as just colleagues before with GeneWEAVE, but also continuing on through Endpoint. Maybe could you just discuss some of the key design choices or even just mindset adjustments that you and the team made to improve that clinic-centric product focus, kind of saying, hey, we had to think about this from the start?
Yeah, I think maybe just a little bit more detail about how to go about really gaining a good insight. I think that one piece is that all the data we've generated from the very beginning, before there was any molecule in the picture, was all patient data, right? So it wasn't models, it wasn't in vitro specimen analyses. It was actually patient samples, patient data, that directly to the disease states, and working with that to generate some of these insights. So that's an important piece of in getting to the point of what is actually driving the issues that we're trying to address in these patients. Another one is that we employed clinicians early on. So one of our first hires in our company was a clinician data scientist. So it's not only had the technical expertise in terms of the work we were doing, but was treating patients and really had a good understanding about from their point of view about what's important. So that was hugely important as well, I think, in some of the how we design the projects and products that we were building. And I guess the other piece is, this is something that I would consider almost analogous to talking to your customers in a general concept, which is in our case in healthcare, the customer is really complicated. There's the patient who's receiving the product or the benefit of the product. There's the providers that are administering it. The payers is not the same. People who pay for it are not the same people. And so I guess the concept that we had is that just physically, literally, you yourself as a founder, or others in your team that are involved in this process, we would go in and follow the patient, right? Follow the nurse, follow the doctor, follow the sample into the lab, see what the lab tech's doing, follow the information. Where are these electrons going, and who's seeing it, where and how, in order to make a decision. Follow the money, right? And so how is the executive staff at a hospital, for example, what's influencing their decisions about what's coming in if it's a hospital-based product or tool. And I guess maybe the other one is also understand how are the individuals involved in this entire process, whether there's any of those parties, and the institution itself, how are they all incentivized? And I think is most people know, there's some weird, crazy incentives in healthcare that are always oftentimes contradictory to each other, sometimes perverse. And so, how do you operate effectively in that environment? So I think it's just I would just label that as something analogous to customer development. And so starting there is, I think, is important.
Oh, certainly important. And it's amazing to see your own journey, how you and the team have thought about transitioning that, being able to inform yourself. And I think it's pretty appropriate to kind of say, customer discovery in a way, something that I think in life sciences space needs to kind of be discussed more, especially like you all say, just from the beginning, right? Not as an afterthought. So I really appreciate that insight, Diego, and that conversation there. I want to take a quick moment to discuss, broadly the journey of Endpoint of you all have kind of seen and faced so far, just more a major challenges and accomplishments section. I mean, Endpoint has found incredible success since its founding, pioneering this novel development and manufacturing approach within the precision medicine space, just raising almost 64 million to date, really to scale your complex but really necessary targeted therapies and companion diagnostic platform. But just looking back, Diego, what have been some of the greatest challenges you faced at Endpoint?
Yeah, it comes back to some of the items we touched on earlier. Really great team, but it's honestly challenging to integrate that diverse set of expertise and backgrounds and so on. So we have diagnostics people, we have pharma people, they're biotech and big pharma people. We have folks who have worked at startups, folks who have not. It's something that's been interesting that in the therapeutic space. This has been my experience. I think it's maybe not shouldn't always be the case, but at GeneWEAVE we found it a lot easier to find folks where most of their experience was startup experience, and some of the experience we needed to bring in. There was less folks with really more of a small company startup background, and so I think that definitely introduces challenges in integrating a team, building a culture that makes sense for everyone around the table. And but when you get it right, it works extremely well, and amazing things get done. But it's definitely a challenge there. Another one, I think, another big challenge is that back to the topic of we're doing something super complex. It's we're not a diagnostics company, we're not a therapeutics company. We're kind of we do it all. And we have the ambition of building that next gen pharma company, right? That's the goal here, is to build a long-standing generational company. It's kind of the precision enabled therapeutics as a next gen pharma company. And so honestly, finding investors who want to join that ride is also challenging. It doesn't make sense for everyone's portfolio, where the probably the majority of the value is going to be realized in quite a bit of time. There's going to be exit opportunities along the way for where it makes sense, but really kind of this building the next pharma company kind of approach. It's not for everybody, I guess, on the finance side. So finding like-minded investors has also been a challenge as well.
Been a great thing to shout out as well. And just on the same note, Diego, what have been some of the greatest accomplishments or just milestones that you all have reached in the team, just looking back?
Yeah, so we already highlighted one, which is the team. That's huge accomplishment from my opinion. The other one is the technology we built. I mean, kind of simply put, it works. So it's I think that looking at what's out there in terms of tools to predict therapy response in a scalable way. I haven't really seen any other examples that have been able to do so in the way that we have. We've demonstrated now across 9 different disease areas and now 4 different mechanisms of action that we could predict therapy response, and really validated that. And so it's to us that really validates our understanding of the biology of the subgroups, which gives us a pretty good amount of confidence about then what's the best molecule to build for, or to develop for the unique biology that comprises each of these diseases. But that's the other one that it goes hand in hand with the team, because really the team is what really made that happen. But yeah, really proud of the work that we've done so far, and the proof that we've generated so far.
100%. And really just Diego here, having discussed Endpoint Health and your approach to date, building this amazing team, the technology that like you said, it works. It's fascinating. Let's just now project out to the future if we can. From your perspective, Diego, what's coming next for Endpoint? What are you excited about in the upcoming months and years here?
Yeah, some really practical items. We're going to start our clinical trials. We got our molecules ready for the clinic. So that's coming up. We also have some interesting potential partnerships in the works. We've gotten outside interest for folks who are other companies that are developing their own molecules, pharma companies, that are interested in using our platform to help develop their therapies, just in the same way that we develop our own therapies with our own platform. So we're working on those as well. And then expanding our pipeline. We're in the business of acquiring in-licensed therapies. We've got 3 in the pipeline so far. The data we've generated about the biological needs in these diseases. We have some holes to fill in our portfolio, and so we'll be bringing in additional molecules as well. So some of the key areas.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about the potential as you talk about this next generation pharma company, Diego, and we're excited to follow along on the sidelines here. As a question, as we discuss this platform model, with any platform company, there's always this debate between vertical integration and horizontal platform expansion. As we look towards the future of Endpoint, just from your own perspective, Diego, how is Endpoint really thinking about these opportunities hand in hand?
Yeah, so we're focused primarily on building our own pipeline of therapies, and we think that it it goes hand in hand with kind of why we built the company, or that we saw a need for a company like ours to exist, where the gut reaction to building a precision therapy is not I'm shrinking my market because I'm treating a subset of patients, but from our point of view, we're still treating everybody. It's just that there might be more than one molecule to do it in the way that we think is most appropriate in order to really maximize efficacy for the disease as a whole. And so far we've seen really in order to really try to do that effectively is that we're doing that ourselves, right? We're using we're kind of eating the dog food. We're using our own products that we built on the precision platform side to develop our own molecules. At the same time, we're not going to be able to treat everyone for every disease. There's a lot of need out there, and so we are looking forward to also partnering with companies where they see a need of some of these precision tools in order to better address disease areas that they're focused on. So we're focused on the former, but we'll definitely be working on with others as well.
Certainly, Diego, and thank you for sharing on that. And just really thinking out about patient impact and looking into the future here, with the adoption of Endpoint's platform and the scale up of targeted therapy platforms in general, we'll hopefully see the cost barriers changing for precision medicine as a whole. As we're projecting out in the future, we're looking forward here, Diego. When do you see this tipping point happening? Potentially, if not a specific framework in mind, what indications or barriers are you most excited about crossing just as an industry as a whole in the precision medicine space? What are you and the Endpoint team excited about with the future as these accessibility barriers change?
Yeah, I think the key one for me is that I'd be extremely excited if we get to a point where the way you get paid is when the product works. It's that you get paid on outcomes, right? It's as opposed to selling the diagnostic test result or the dosing the drug, is that the incentive is when outcomes improve. So that's a point in time I'm looking forward to. There's hints of that in some areas, in some diseases, and et cetera. But it's not really the way the world works today, and that'd be a really interesting time when we get to that point.
Obviously some of the most obvious are the most exciting in the space, and we're looking forward to seeing how Endpoint can scale up and partner with some of these folks coming in the future. But just as we're looking forward, as we're chatting about kind of this future facing model here with Endpoint, with yourself, Diego, one thing I just wanted to highlight personally, just in addition to your work scaling the technology and the company itself, you're also an angel investor through Endpoint Ventures, and formally, as we talked about this, this part-time partner, this expert at Y Combinator, just ever pushing the next generation of future startup leaders, academic entrepreneurs. From your own perspective, Diego, that's someone that's been this cornerstone, even in the San Francisco market, but just as many other just these entrepreneurial hubs. How do you think about supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs, just as a serial founder yourself?
Yeah, I guess this really simply put is take the call. It's really an ecosystem. I certainly benefited from a lot of help, insights, etc., from individuals that were willing to take that call. And where I had a question, wanted to learn something that when I was just getting started. So I think that's hugely important. I get cold emails all the time, and I respond to them. Try to be helpful where I can. It does take a lot of time, and so I try to manage that as best as I can. And there's times where I just there was way too much going on. There's other times where a little bit more bandwidth available. But whenever I can, just definitely try to be helpful in any way I can.
Certainly. It's amazing to hear Diego as well. And really, just before we come to a close, I just wanted to throw out a few rapid fire questions just to cap things off. We like to end the series as well in Builders here, just chatting about the future as well. And just, imagine it's really 2050, Diego. Could you describe the precision medicine space from your perspective? What challenges have we addressed? What diseases have we treated? Where are we going now?
Yeah, I think so. To me, very much biased towards what we do, of course, but it's more precision in more disease areas, right? We made a lot of progress in the oncology space. We're trying to do the same in the immunology space, and I think as we dig deeper and deeper, we'll have a better and better understanding of these diseases. And in many cases, it's not always the case in every disease area, but in many cases, I think the disease area is going to benefit from a precision approach. And if I were to name one disease where by then I hope we have a handle on is sepsis. Huge mortality rates, considered the graveyard of therapeutics development as well. Very difficult to do work there because of the past failures. Huge unmet need, of course. And I think that there's a lot of promise in doing some really great work there and doing a lot of good along the way. So I think that's one particular area that I think that hopefully will contribute to some solutions there as well.
100%. And as we're talking about contributions here, imagining it's still 2050, where's Endpoint from your perspective?
Endpoint in 2050. I think our goal really would be we're considered the largest next gen pharma company out there that's precision enabled. And importantly, with maybe considered the good guy in the public eye as well. I have a lot of respect for pharma. They get a lot of flack these days, and so I think one way that we hopefully might get to the point where we're one of those big pharma companies, but at the same time, maybe we're get the benefit of the doubt from the public eye. Is that in the case that, back to the previous point, if we're really actually getting paid when outcomes are improving, then that's kind of the goal there. It's actually the reason we named the company Endpoint is we wanted to build a company that was incentivized when patients improved, when the profits were directly linked to the outcomes, and hence Endpoint Health. And so that's where we'd like to get to that point. That we'd like to be the big pharma company at at that point in time. That'd be phenomenal if we can get there.
We'd be excited to see that. Well, thank you again so much for your time, Diego. We're super grateful for it. And thank you once again for joining us. Thanks so much.